2 days after graduating from Yale, Ali Truwit's entire life changed. One moment, she was in the ocean, celebrating the beginning of a new chapter. The next, she was fighting to survive a shark attack. The water around her turned red. Her body was badly injured. And the young woman who had spent years as a competitive swimmer suddenly faced a reality almost impossible to imagine. She would lose part of her left leg. For most people, that kind of trauma would be enough to change everything forever. But Ali Truwit made a decision. She refused to let the worst day of her life become the final chapter of her story. And what happened next stunned the world. Just 465 days after the shark attack, Ali returned to competitive swimming. She represented the United States. She broke American records. And she won not one, but 2 Paralympic silver medals. This is the incredible story of Ali Truwit. A story about surviving the unimaginable. About returning to the place you fear the most. About the people who refuse to let you give up. And about one question that changed everything. When life takes something from you, how do you decide what happens next? Because Ali's answer was extraordinary. Before the medals, before the headlines, before the world knew her name, Ali Truwit was simply a young woman who loved the water. Swimming wasn't just a sport to her. It was part of her identity. The pool had shaped her life for years. She trained, she competed, she pushed herself, she learned discipline at a level most people never experience. Eventually, Ali became a Division I swimmer at Yale University. To reach that level takes more than talent. It requires years of sacrifice. Early mornings, exhausting workouts, missed opportunities, the willingness to get back into the pool even when your body is tired and your mind is telling you to stop. Swimming taught Ali how to endure. But she had no idea that those lessons would one day help save her life. In May 2023, Ali had just graduated from Yale. She was 22 years old. She had completed one of the biggest milestones of her life. And like many young people at that age, she was looking toward the future. Everything seemed possible. The difficult years of college were behind her. A new chapter was beginning. To celebrate, Ali traveled to Turks and Caicos with friends. Among them was her close friend and fellow Yale swimmer, Sophie Pilkington. The trip was supposed to be beautiful, relaxing, a chance to enjoy the ocean and celebrate everything they had accomplished. No one expected that within days, their lives would be changed forever. It began as a snorkeling excursion. The water was clear, the sun was shining, Ali and Sophie were in the ocean. Then suddenly, everything changed. A shark attacked Ali. In a matter of seconds, a peaceful moment became a nightmare. Ali suffered devastating injuries to her left leg. The attack was violent, confusing, and terrifying, but the nightmare was not over. They were still in the water. Ali had been badly injured. She was losing blood, and now she had to survive. This is where years of swimming training suddenly meant something entirely different. The competitive athlete inside Ali took over. She had to keep moving. She had to stay alive. She and Sophie made their way back toward the boat. Imagine the terror. Imagine the pain. Imagine knowing that every second matters. Sophie helped get Ali back to the boat and applied a tourniquet. That immediate action was critical. Ali was eventually airlifted to a trauma center in Miami. She had survived, but the fight was only beginning. For most people, surviving a shark attack would be the biggest challenge of their life. For Ali, survival was only the first step. The days that followed were filled with surgeries, medical treatment, uncertainty, and unimaginable physical pain. Doctors worked to save her life and protect what they could. But the damage was severe. Eventually, Ali's left leg was amputated below the knee. Think about what that means. Only days earlier, Ali had been celebrating her Yale graduation. She had been looking ahead to everything she wanted to do. She had spent years training her body as a Division I athlete. And now she had to learn how to live in a completely different body. The questions must have felt endless. Would she walk normally again? Would she swim? Would she return to competition? Would she ever feel like herself again? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, would she ever return to the ocean? Trauma does something strange. The world continues moving. Other people go back to work. They make plans. They laugh. They complain about ordinary things. But for the person whose life has suddenly changed, time can feel completely different. One moment can divide your life into 2 parts. Before and after. Before the shark attack, and after the shark attack. Ali now had to figure out who she was in the after. But here is where her story becomes truly remarkable. She did not allow the injury to become her entire identity. That doesn't mean the journey was easy. It wasn't. Recovery was difficult. There were painful days. There were emotional challenges. There was the enormous task of learning how to use a prosthetic leg. There was the reality of looking at her life and understanding that some things would never be exactly the same. But Ali had spent years developing one important skill. She knew how to train. She knew how to work. And she knew how to continue even when things were difficult. The difference was that this time, the challenge was no longer a competition. This time, the challenge was life itself. Ali began her recovery, one step at a time. Sometimes literally, learning to walk again, adjusting to a prosthetic, understanding how her body moved differently, building strength, finding balance, doing the difficult work that nobody sees in inspirational headlines. Because people often see the final moment, the medal, the celebration, the applause, but they don't always see the mornings when getting out of bed is difficult. They don't see the frustration, the fear, the moments when progress feels painfully slow. And Ali had to experience all of it. But somewhere during that journey, another idea began to form. She wanted to swim again. That decision might sound natural. After all, she had always been a swimmer. But think about what the water now represented. The ocean had nearly taken her life. Returning to the water meant confronting the place connected to her greatest trauma. It meant facing memories, fear, uncertainty, and the possibility that nothing would feel the same. But Ali made a choice. She was going back. At first, the goal wasn't about medals. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about the Paralympic Games. It was about reclaiming something. The water had been part of her life before the attack. And she didn't want fear to decide that it would no longer be part of her future. So she returned. And returning was emotional. Because sometimes courage isn't the absence of fear. Sometimes courage means being terrified. And moving forward anyway. Ali entered the water again. And she began swimming. But she was not the same swimmer she had been before. Her body was different. Her stroke was different. Her balance was different. Everything had to be adjusted. She had to learn again. And this is where the role of coaching became incredibly important. Great coaching is about more than technique. Of course, coaches help athletes become faster. They correct mistakes. They create training plans. They prepare people for competition. But the greatest coaches can do something even more powerful. They can help a person see themselves when they are struggling to see themselves clearly. After a traumatic injury, an athlete can easily focus on what has been lost. Ali could have spent every day thinking about what she used to do. How fast she used to swim. How her body used to move. How life used to be. But the most important question was no longer about the past. It was about possibility. What could she do now? What could she become? And how far could she go? Ali's support system helped her look forward. Not by pretending the shark attack hadn't happened. And not by pretending her challenges were small. But by understanding that her life was still moving. She was still capable. She was still an athlete. And perhaps, in some ways, she was becoming stronger than ever. Then came the decision that turned an incredible recovery into one of the most extraordinary comeback stories in sports. Ali wanted to compete at the Paralympics. For most people, the idea would have sounded impossible. She had just survived a shark attack. She was recovering from an amputation. She was learning to live with a prosthetic. And now she wanted to compete at one of the biggest sporting events in the world. The Paralympic Games are not a rehabilitation program. These are elite athletes, the best in the world. And Ali wanted to get there. The clock was already running. Paris 2024 was approaching. Every day mattered. Every training session mattered. Every improvement mattered. Ali was racing against more than other athletes. She was racing against time. And she kept going. Day after day, lap after lap, stroke after stroke. The young woman who had been fighting for her life in the ocean was now training to race again. That alone would have been an incredible achievement. But Ali wasn't finished. She kept improving. She kept competing. And eventually, she earned her place on Team USA. Think about that moment. Not long before, Ali had been in a hospital bed. Now she was preparing to represent her country. The dream was real. The Paralympics were real. And suddenly, the entire world would have the opportunity to see what she had built out of tragedy. Then came Paris. The Paralympic Games. The moment Ali had spent months fighting to reach. But this was more than another swimming competition. Every step of the journey was behind her. The shark attack, the surgeries, the amputation, the prosthetic, the fear, the rehabilitation, the return to the pool. And now, the race. Ali stepped onto one of the biggest stages in sports. For a moment, the past and the present must have collided. The same woman who had been told by life that everything had changed was now standing among elite athletes. But Ali didn't come to Paris simply to participate. She came to compete. And then she did something extraordinary. Ali won silver. A Paralympic silver medal. For many athletes, winning a medal at the Paralympic Games would be the achievement of a lifetime. But Ali wasn't finished. She returned to the water again. And she won another silver medal. 2 Paralympic silver medals. 2 American records. And all of this happened just 465 days after the shark attack. 465 days. Try to imagine compressing that much change into such a short period. One day, you are snorkeling with friends. The next, you're fighting to survive. Months later, you're learning to walk differently. Then you're training. Then you're competing. And suddenly, you're standing on the Paralympic podium. 2 medals. The American flag. The crowd. The cameras. The world watching. And behind that moment was a story nobody in that arena could fully see. Because every medal has a journey. Ali's journey happened to be one of the most extraordinary. But perhaps the most important part of her story is what she represents. Ali didn't beat trauma by pretending it didn't affect her. She didn't wake up one day and suddenly become fearless. Her story is more complicated. She moved forward with fear. She moved forward after loss. She moved forward after her body changed. And that's what makes her story so powerful. Because life doesn't always give us the chance to go back to who we were. Sometimes, something happens that changes us forever. The question becomes, can we build something new? Ali Truwit did. And she didn't do it alone. Her friend Sophie helped save her life. Medical professionals helped her survive and recover. Her coaches helped guide her return. Her family and support system stood beside her. That is another powerful lesson. Even the strongest people need help. We often tell inspiring stories as if one person did everything alone. But that's rarely true. Behind every extraordinary comeback is often a team of people. People who make the call. People who apply the tourniquet. People who stay in the hospital. People who encourage you when you want to quit. People who remind you of your strength when you've forgotten it. And Ali's story also reminds us of something else. Great coaching isn't about telling someone that everything will be easy. It isn't about saying, you can do anything, without acknowledging the difficulty. Great coaching helps a person understand what they can do next. One step, one stroke, one lap, one day at a time. That approach changed everything. Ali could not control what had happened to her. But she could control what happened next. And that's what she did. She made a choice. Not once, but repeatedly. Every time rehabilitation became difficult. Every time training became exhausting. Every time fear appeared. Every time the future felt uncertain. She made the choice to continue. And 465 days later, she stood on the Paralympic podium. But Ali's story goes beyond the shark attack. It goes beyond swimming. It goes beyond sports. Because all of us face moments when something changes unexpectedly. A dream disappears. A relationship ends. A career fails. Someone we love is gone. A door closes. And suddenly, the future we imagined no longer exists. In those moments, it's natural to ask, why did this happen to me? Ali's story suggests another question. What can I do now? That question doesn't erase pain. It doesn't make tragedy fair. But it creates movement. And sometimes, movement is the beginning of hope. Ali couldn't go back and undo the shark attack. She couldn't return to the exact person she had been before. But she could become someone new. A survivor. A Paralympian. A record holder. A 2-time silver medalist. And perhaps most importantly, a person whose story reminds millions of people that a terrible moment does not automatically mean a terrible future. Today, when people hear Ali Truwit's name, they may first think about the shark attack. But that's only the beginning of her story. Her real story is what happened after. She returned to the water. She returned to competition. She returned to a life filled with possibility. And she did it faster than almost anyone could have imagined. Ali Truwit went from fighting for her life to fighting for medals, from the ocean to the Paralympic pool, from trauma to triumph. And maybe that is the most powerful lesson of all. You don't always get to choose what happens to you. But sometimes, you get to choose what you do next. And that choice can change everything. So now I want to ask you, if you had gone through what Ali went through, do you think you could have returned to the water? What part of Ali Truwit's journey inspired you the most? The shark attack, her recovery, her decision to swim again, or winning 2 Paralympic silver medals just 465 days later? Let us know in the comments below. And if Allie's incredible story inspired you, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable stories of courage, resilience, and unbelievable comebacks. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories begin at the moment you think everything is over.